Hello everyone and welcome to another video on the ToLiss Airbus A321, and today we're going to look at flying an RNAV approach. It's been requested by a few of you, so we'll have a look at doing that here in Rome Fiumicino onto runway 16 left, and we'll look at some of the differences with some of our other approaches. I am a real-world Airbus pilot, so hopefully this brings some extra context to your home simulations, but as always this isn't for any real-world use, it's just for our use in X-Plane. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so here we are in the hold at Suvok. We're sitting here at 4,000 feet, which is our minimum hold altitude. 185 knots is the maximum speed in this hold, so we're doing 180 knots flap 2. It's quite an unusual holding speed. It's not really where you'd expect to hold. It's quite low down, so it's not very efficient. This would be quite a last-minute thing if it's given to you by air traffic. So we're going to sit here, and then we're going to head off and fly the RNAV approach for runway 16 left. So I'm going to bring this up full screen for us to make it a bit easier. Right. So the difference with an RNAV and our normal non-precision approaches is basically that we're going to be using the aircraft's own navigation performance to fly the approach, and especially we're going to be using GPS. With a VOR or an NDB approach, we had two options. We could fly it using final app, or what's called fully managed approach, or we can fly it using selected modes, or a combination of the two. Selected modes being track and FPA, where we manually follow the VOR. With an RNAV approach, we have to fly in either nav FPA or we have to fly in final app. We can't fly in track FPA because there's nothing for us to track, because we're simply following this green line that the airplane has in its head, effectively. It also means that we don't have any backup outside the airplane, so we need to use the GPS systems on the aircraft. So I can see here I've got GPS primary, and there's another GPS on the other side. So we've got two FMGCs on the Airbus. We have this one and this one. I know these are the MCDUs, but they both lead into their own FMGCs. We can use either of these. So if I want to use this one, I'll use autopilot 1, or if I want to use this one, I'll use autopilot 2. So if one of them said accuracy low, or it didn't have GPS primary, then I have to use the other side, and I only need to use one of them to do this. So here we go then, RNP runway 16 left. We're in the hold. We're going to head from Suvok down to Auxerre and then fly the approach. So we'll go through our usual hat for FMGC setup. Suvok, and I'll go to plan mode and we'll have a look through. There we go, that should be good. Suvok, Auxerre, fine, 210 knots, and there is a speed limit there. Then RF 741. So Auxerre RF741, track of 160, and then it says track 159 to Fiumicino, runway 16 left. So this is something else we have to do on this approach. We have to check the coding very, very carefully, because we are relying on this coding to be accurate. In the real airplane, we can only use 1 degree difference between this charted final approach track and the track in the box, and unfortunately it's actually 2 degrees here. So as you can see, we've got 161 and this is showing 159, although it does show 160 for the step before. Now there's a few reasons why this could be, it can be wrong in the airplane as well, as long as there is a check of the coding error carried out by the company, that sort of thing. So there's all sorts of airline procedures as to whether we can do this or not. So I'm going to say for today in X-Plane we can. I'm not sure why there's that difference showing. But as I say, in real life we treat it very carefully. So we also need to check the vertical profile very carefully. It's not shown here on the ToLiss FMGC yet, unfortunately, so we need to check it within 0.1. So this is a 3 degree approach, it says here, but unfortunately we can't check the box. What I can see is the final descent point should be RF741, because that's planned to be at 2,500 feet. As I said, we would also need to check that in the box, but it's hard without the angle. It's basically the final descent point will be where you have your first angle showing a descent. Anyway, so for today, we're going to use RF741 because we know we'll be there 2,500 feet, so that's our platform, essentially. We're using final app for this approach, so I can configure exactly as I would for an RLS, so I'm going to do that. I'll be flap 2, 160 knots, start down the glide slope, and then put out the rest of the gear. Something worth checking carefully as well is the missed approach, of course. So we will have a look up here, and we're going to climb on the runway heading, 161, so it seems to be accurate there, frustratingly. And then we are going to go to 2,000 feet, RF742, make a right turn, maximum 185, and then intercept 186 to intercept the radial 160 from Oscar Sierra Tango. Continue to RF 743 and hold. So that's all in there, so that's great. So we'll do our hat for our approach FMGC setup. RadNavs, well, this is using the OST as a backup DME. They reference it a few times. So what I'll do is I think I will actually stick in the OST as a hard tune on my side. OST. Oh. Because why not? Next, we're going to look at the progress page. I've already put in the threshold. This is advisable LIRF16 left because we don't have an accurate DME. The DME, this VOR OST, isn't on the runway. It's nowhere near it, in fact. So we're a lot closer than we realised. 2.4 miles closer to the threshold than the VOR shows. So it's worth having this in here. And a lot of RNAV approaches will use that as the reference for distance. They won't bother with this VOR. So it does depend on where you are. Performance page. I've entered the weather as per normal for a flat full landing. And minima, this is quite important. We've got a few options for minima for an RNAV approach or an RNP approach. There's a few different names of them. Today we have, it says here, LPV, DAH refer to minimums. So we go down to the bottom of the charts. And here we go, LPV. Well, we're not an LPV equipped airplane as far as I'm aware. I've never flown one. That's quite a fancy, it means localizer performance and vertical guidance, I believe, something like that. Basically, we aren't equipped for it. I don't know if there are any short-haul Airbuses that are. There may well be. It's amazing the different equipment you can have fitted to these airplanes. They're all quite variable. So we're going to use this minima on the right, the LNAV VNAV minima, which is not quite as good. It's not quite as accurate, but it's not bad either. We also have this note, missed approach climb rate minimum 4.3 up to 2,000. So your airline performance procedures would cover that. You need to work out whether you meet that. We're a Category C airplane, so I'm going to use 500. Now, I can only use this minima if I'm doing an LNAV VNAV approach. If I'm just doing an LNAV approach, so that would mean I was using nav mode and FPA guidance and just tracking the, I'm following the vertical profile manually. If I was doing that, then I would need to use this minima. It's not as accurate. But for today, we can use LNAV and VNAV because I'm going to use final app mode, which is much easier. It reduces the workload and it gives us better minima. Some reasons you might end up with this would be, for example, if you didn't have good enough vertical guidance for some reason, although to be honest, you still have to have GPS working to fly that because you're using nav mode. But it's typically to do with temperature. If it's too cold and the temperature is below the minimum temperature for this procedure, then the vertical guidance in this mode isn't satisfactory. So we'd need to use this mode and follow it ourselves and use appropriate corrections for the cold weather. The colder it is, the lower you actually will be to the ground. So it starts to become an issue. It's quite cold, usually something like it could be minus 10 degrees, somewhere around there. It depends on the airport and the procedure. Here you go, Barrow VNAV not authorized below minus 25 degrees Celsius. So that means if that happens, you couldn't use the VNAV mode. Another thing, if you'll remember from my last non-precision approach video, the QNH is so important, really important you get it right from air traffic control and it is set right, otherwise the vertical profile just won't work. The airplane will show you on this VDEV scale that you are on the right profile, even though you are not, because it will have the wrong idea in its head. Okay, won't dwell on that too long. Fuel prediction, we got a little extra fuel and secondaries just to copy. So let's go and get started with the approach. Just to give you some context of where we are. We're in the hold now at Suvok. We're at 4,000 feet. I've already activated the approach phase, which is why we have this bar. Remember, you do not turn on the LS button at 10,000 feet. And let's go and begin the approach. Okay, now we are approaching Auxerre, descending to 2,500 feet, which is acceptable. There's our radio altimeter check. Now it's quite a lot out, isn't it? That's because there's terrain beneath us, something we'd have checked off our chart earlier. We can see it on this chart here. You can see it going up and down beneath us, and lateral deviation sitting there. If you accidentally leave LS on, you'll see this flashing VDEV scale because we're not using the ILS, so important we get rid of that. So I'm going to arm the approach button when RF741 is my next waypoint. And that is where we expect to descend from 2,500 feet, which is our platform. And you'll see here as we intercept, I've got no needles to track. I've got nothing else. I just need to monitor that we have GPS primary accuracy high. You can see the required accuracy is very precise, 0.3 nautical miles required to do this. We actually estimated 0.05, which is great. Okay, so soon, there it is. RF741 is our next waypoint. I'm going to reduce the speed to 160 as I said I would before we begin down that slope, and I'm going to arm the approach. And we see it's immediately gone into final lap. Sometimes it would give you the armed modes first, depending. And now we know that this brick here, this VDEV brick, will come down to meet us because it's going to be at 2,500 feet at that point. So we know we'll capture it. That's the point. So there we go, 160 knots. And you'll see that this is actually a really simple procedure. It's really a great thing to have. It doesn't need anything working on the ground because sometimes VORs and ILSs are out of service, that sort of thing. And we can simply fly the approach ourselves. The downside being we need the airplane to be functioning quite well to do it. Although I say quite well, we have backup systems, so it's not likely to lose all of them, you'd hope. So it's just shifting the focus from the ground-based radio navigator to the airplane. And here we go. Now we'll back up our profile. So at 6.4 OST, I'm currently at 9. I'm looking for 1350 feet. Would give me a good idea. Let's configure. Gear down. Flap 3. And as you can see, it really doesn't matter that I'm configuring on the glide slope because the airplane now, we've ballooned a little bit high and it increases the rate of descent to get back onto profile, just like it would in ILS. Really handy. Of course, if we were flying in FPA mode, so NAV FPA, which we could do, but we couldn't use this minima. But if we were flying NAV FPA, I'd have to have configured before I started my descent. Otherwise, we'd get high on the profile. It'd be very hard to make it back down again. And there we go. The next thing to talk about is what do we do when we get to minima? Well, the missed approach point for this approach is actually at the threshold. I can see this here, LIRF 16 left. It takes us all the way there, and you can see this here as well. So why do I want to take out the autopilot? Oh, sorry, take off the flight directors. Well, you actually won't need to in the real airplane these days. In approaches that are coded correctly, it's possible to have the, let me just tell that marker. It's possible to have the flight directors give you useful guidance all the way down to basically the threshold, at which point you just land the airplane and they will revert to final modes. But so far in the ToLiss, I've seen that it will actually revert early. So the official, we are stable at 1,000 feet, minimum use height for the autopilot varies as per airlines and procedures and airplanes, but sometimes down to sort of 250 feet above the ground is possible. But for that to be useful today, we would need the flight directors to stay working in this mode effectively. So we'll see what happens. I'm expecting them to revert to heading and vertical speed too early. I think they'll revert around 400 feet, which is not up to date with some of the latest software in Airbus. If that happens, I'm just going to disconnect the autopilot, turn off the flight directors, and put the bird on. Remember, we always turn off the flight directors if we aren't following them. And you can see how accurate this minima is. It's much lower than the VOR approach we did into ToLiss. That's our minima there. Brilliant. Almost at the threshold. It's not far off a proper RLS. And there we go. That's happened about 400 feet right out, which is too early. But anyway, flight directors off. Just bird on and set the runway track, and then we can just land ourselves. And now it's just a case of keeping that rate of descent, rate of descent for our normal landing technique. Also, it brings us on a straight in, basically. We don't have to have any offset. Some VORs will be offset usually because of the fact the VOR isn't in the right place. As an example for you, if we decided we couldn't use vertical navigation, so we have to use LNAV, then I need to change my minima, and I'm going to use this minima here, 570. So simply go here, 570. You'll also notice it says CDFA, so that's continuous descent final approach, which is what we are going to do, which is when we in the old days, there would be some approaches where you would go down to minimum and fly level until you could see the runway or not, and then go around. But these days we don't do that. We fly this continuous descent on final. And then we can simply track it as we did last time using track FPA, except we're going to use nav FPA, and I'm going to do it using these distances. So at 7 miles, but see, it's distance to runway 16 left, so you can't use the VOR distance. We're using the progress page distance, so it'll appear here, or once we are on final approach, it will appear in the top right of the navigation display. So let's have a look at doing that. Differences being, we will need to configure fully before we begin our descent. So I'll be gear down flap 3, and then just as we reach top of descent, I'm going to go flap full and start my descent at 3 degrees. Okay, so here we are, getting close to our platform altitude, soon turning on to final. We're already in nav mode, so now I'm not going to arm final approach because of course we are using track FPA, but I am going to change to track FPA, and I'll leave it in nav. You can see it's gone to FPA minus 2.9. That's not an issue. It's going to capture. There we go. Out star. Retract the speed brakes. Okay. Go to flap 3. And same distance as before. So about 1 mile before, I'm going to arm my 3 degrees. And then at half a mile, I'll put it at flap full. And 0.3 miles, I'm going to select 3 degrees down. So we now gear down flap 3. We can arm the spoilers. Dim the cabin. Waiting for the rest. 2 miles to go. By arming this profile, I simply just mean you can just scroll it in there. Eventually that will go blank if it stays in the wrong mode for too long. So that's why we wait till about a mile before we set it up. And then we got our altitude checks here. So there's 1.3, so let's get there ready now. So there's 3 degrees, it's ready to go. At 0.5, I'm going to put out flap full. 0.5 now, flap full. Get ready with the 2 dots to pull. There we go, 0.3 and pull. And that should mean that accounting for the balloon of the flaps and the time it takes to start our descent, we are pretty much on profile. And here we are now, established on the descent, and we just do our usual mileage checks. 5 miles, 1660 is our next check, so let's see what happens. Five miles. Now, 1660, I'd say that's pretty good. Don't want to fiddle with it. Maybe 10 feet high. We'll see what happens at the next one. 4 miles, 1345. We also have the help of this VDEV scale starting to show what we think is happening is actually happening. So 4 miles, 1345. We're probably a good at least 10 feet high. So let's go to 3.2. That should solve it by 3 miles. So 3 miles, I want 1025. We are stable at 1,000 feet. 3 miles. It's still not worked, has it? 3 miles. Now let's go to 3.3. I think the real airplane, I must admit, is slightly quicker at moving that FPA to the right place, but it could be a number of reasons. Next check, 2 miles, 710. And 2.0, 720, 730. Okay, start to bring that back because it's coming in. 3.2 will be fine. And now we're very close to our minima. So let's get looking out. We've gone through 100 buffs and minimums. Let's go autopilot off. Flight director's off. And the bird is already on. Carry on for our normal landing. As you can see, it keeps you slightly further out, so it's not quite as good as the full-on LNAV VNAV minima. And here we are through 70 knots. Down to taxi speed, we'll go to forward idle and bring it to a stop on the runway. I hope that's been useful for you. Something slightly different today then. Again, another sort of approach, looking at the RNAVs. It's not comprehensive, as always. This isn't for any real-world use. It's not any particular airline procedures. I'm just giving you an idea of what might go on in the real airplane and what we look for when we fly these things. There are some differences with the simulator that we just can't sort out, which is a shame. But then at the same time, it's pretty impressive already what is achievable and what we can compare. I'll do more videos on this sort of thing soon, hopefully get some interesting approaches, because there's all sorts of variations on RNAVs that they're typically used as well for airports that can't have a normal ILS, so they can be quite interesting. I'm sure you guys are aware of a few, so we'll start trying to fly some of those approaches and see what we can do there. That's it then. As always, thank you very much for watching, and see you in another video soon.